Hey guys, welcome to the video. It's Aaron, your ecom finance partner. Let's get into it. So I'm going to take you through the 3 core advertising / marketing metrics that you have to be aware of, and also which ones you should be tracking and which ones you can just ignore and cut through all the nonsense. Those are ROAS, CPA, and CAC. So that's return on ad spend, cost per acquisition, and customer acquisition cost. Without further ado, let's get into the video. The chances are you're probably tracking the wrong metrics, or you're not using the metrics to its advantage. For example, number 1 here, we've got return on ad spend, also known as ROAS. It's effectively for every £1 you spend, how much revenue you get back. So let's say you are a supplement brand company, you sell a given set of supplements for £100. You want to drive some sales, you push an ad campaign live, you spend, for example, £10 and you generate £100 worth of sales or 1 sale. That is a 10x ROAS. So you spent £10, you got £100 back. That's a multiplier of 10. Happy days, good return on investment, right? However, when we break that down, as in how much does that £100 actually leave us with at the end of all the costs? So straight away, £17 to the tax man, everyone's favorite man or woman. You then got landed cost. So that is the amount that you've spent on the product plus the shipping to get from your supplier, either direct to your customer or to your warehouse. Probably going to be your biggest cost, £45. You then got ad spend. We saw that we spent £10 previously to generate that 1 sale. So that £10 comes off our £100. Then you've got third-party logistics services. So for example, if you outsource your fulfillment to a different third party or warehouse, £6 is going to come off your £100. You then got shipping. How's it going to get from your warehouse to the customer within decent time? It's going to cost a bit of money. In this case, it's cost you £5. We've then also got platform fees. It's not free to list your products on websites, maybe eBay, but generally speaking, Shopify, you're going to have platform fees. There's going to be Stripe fees potentially associated with that, or PayPal. If you're selling on Amazon, it's going to be a lot higher, 20% of the price of what you're selling, but in this case, £4. And then lastly, we've got packaging, £3. You're selling a premium product, you want to send it in a nice bit of packaging, branded, whatever it may be, and that's going to cost you £3 per unit. So we sold a unit for £100. After all of these costs, what are we left with? We are left with £90 of costs. 100 minus 90, as you'd expect, is £10. That's your remaining margin. And you might think, great, solid, £10 in the bag, let's go. However, you have overheads to cover, meaning that we now need to distribute this £10, or at least apportion some of that to our overheads. So you've got rent, whether that be a warehouse, an office, whatever it may be, you've got to keep the lights on. Tools and subscriptions. This is a big one recently. We now live in a digital age where there's tools for everything, and you'll probably find that you've got subscriptions that come out month on month. Some of them you don't even know what for, but this is not taken into consideration when factoring in these total costs related to the sale of the product. So some of this margin has to be allocated to those tools. And then thirdly, and probably most importantly, well, not most importantly, as we'll find out in a minute, but one of the core elements of your business is your staff, your employees, the people who effectively run the business day in, day out. You have to pay these people, and some of this margin goes directly to them. But the most important is the business owner, and that's you. Crying, looking in the wallet, no money, because you haven't factored in your margins. You think, great, a 10x ROAS, which at face value is solid. You know, spend £10, £100 back. But when you look at that in isolation, it doesn't really stack up. When you look at this and you realize, well, actually, what am I left with? Nothing, basically nothing. So how do you get around that? That is why we've now reintroduced the core metric, which is a level up from ROAS, and that is your CPA, your cost per acquisition. So what is cost per acquisition? It is your total cost for the advertising campaign divided by the number of acquisitions that you make. Acquisitions is interchangeable with conversions, orders. Effectively, how many orders did we get for the amount of money that we spent on a given campaign. Using the previous example as our core logic base, we spent £10 and we generated £100 worth of sales. That £100 worth of sales was the equivalent to 1 conversion, given that we spent £10 to generate 1 sale. That's your £10 CPA, and you will see that feeds into the same example that we were looking at before. So we've got this £10 CPA that we used to acquire this customer over here. We spent £10 to generate 1 sale. The reason why we look at everything on a unit economics basis is that we can see for every 1 sale that we make, what are the costs associated with that sale. The reason we split it out like this is because cost per acquisition gives the clue in the name, is that we look at everything from a cost basis. If we look at everything from a cost basis, it means that we can start to measure what's actually happening in the business. Whereas if it's just at a pure revenue level, there isn't that much we can do with it. Yes, we'll know how much revenue we're generating, but it doesn't go much further beyond that. We can't manipulate the numbers any further. And this is the mistake that I see business owners make time and time again. It is this concept called measure, optimize, scale. What I mean by that is that if you don't measure, then quite simply, we just don't know what to optimize, because we don't know what's behind the data. And if we don't know what's behind the data, i.e. we can't measure it, we can't optimize, and therefore we can't scale. Well, you can scale, and what I find is that businesses do scale, but they don't scale in an optimal fashion. And then what happens is, at the end of the year, they go, well, where's all the profit? Look at all this sales that I generated. But as we know, revenue does not equal profit. Not all revenue is equal. Some revenue is better than others. So by looking at this on the measure, optimize, scale framework, we've now measured the sale by function of unit economics. We know exactly what goes into the sale of each unit. And because we know that, we can now identify the pockets which we can change, the levers that we can pull to make the product more profitable. It may not actually be a problem with the ads. It could very well be that shipping costs are too expensive. It may be that the third-party logistics center is too expensive, and there are optimizations we can make. Once you've made those optimizations, then you can scale. And then you can scale with confidence. You understand your numbers, it makes sense. But that's why looking at ROAS at face value doesn't really provide anything of substance. And that's what this graphic shows here. People will love to look at their sales to fuel their ego. But revenue does not keep the lights on. Revenue does not pay you at the end of the day. All it does is fill up your head thinking, great, you're making money. And in reality, the business could really be burning. Seen businesses turn over hundreds and hundreds of thousands and have nothing to show for it at the end of the day. As they say, revenue is vanity, profit is sanity. And by looking at your advertising metrics by function of cost rather than revenue, you start to get a better picture of how the ads are performing, how your business is performing overall, and then you can make optimizations and actually feel confident in what you're doing. So that is, of course, your CPA, cost per acquisition. And you might be thinking, what's the third one? And that's if you go a step further than CPA, and that is your customer acquisition cost. And that is all of your ad spend plus the sales and the marketing expenses divided by the total number of new customers that you've generated. So before, what we were looking at was £2,500 worth of ad spend that we spent before, divided by the 250 customers. That was originally your £10, because you take 2,500 divided by 250. That was the previous cost per acquisition. Now, when we look at customer acquisition cost, we start looking at all the other costs associated with marketing and with sales that drives new business. So for example, you may have a customer success manager who deals with all customers, post-sale, customer service. That is effectively related to your sales and marketing department. Also, the ads won't run themselves. If you use an agency or employ someone in the business, we factor that in as well. So this gives you a more fully loaded understanding of how efficient your marketing and sales department is for your business. So you spent £2,500 on ads, you got £500 ads agency and £2,000 customer success manager. So all things sales and marketing related, you spend £5,000 in a month. you've generated 250 new customers, which you can easily find through your Shopify data. That now means we spent 5,000 over divided by 250 customers, which means that your customer acquisition cost is £20. So for every £20 you spend on sales and marketing, you in theory generate one new customer. So now if we take a look at our customer acquisition cost embedded within the previous example that we were looking at, and now replacing it with what is now the customer acquisition cost. So previous CPA, £10. Now we include all the other agency fees, extra marketing team, it's an additional £10. This ad spend effectively goes up to 20. And because this has gone up by 10, we're now increasing our total cost by 10. And as a result, it means that you're left with effectively zero. And that might seem problematic. However, there are other things you need to consider, of course, as part of the wider strategy. And that includes things like, customer lifetime value. If you're going to have repeat customers, they might come back and therefore you would generate profit off the back of that. At a very high level, we'll be able to demonstrate that. So for example, you have the customer previously who spent £100. We paid £10 to get them, or £20 including all agency fees. We had other costs up here of £80. So this 90 minus the 10 on ad spend, meaning that we have now generated an initial margin of £10. But now that we've acquired that customer, we no longer need to pay advertising costs in the future. So they spend £100 again. They're on a subscription model. Now the cost of that sale is £70 because we're not including that £10 ad spend, and therefore we've generated £20 profit on there. She comes back again next month, but when she comes back another time, she spends a bit more. We've built up some brand loyalty, and there's some other costs in there of £80, £60 worth of margin. So you can start to see that over the lifetime of that customer, we can start to generate profits going forward. But without getting into too much detail, that would be for another video. What this shows is the 3 core concepts of metrics that your business should be tracking in terms of marketing and ad spend. So you've got ROAS, which I think is a bullshit metric, and you can cut through all the fluff. It doesn't add any value other than knowing how much revenue you've got. The second one, which I think is the most important step from getting to a revenue mindset to a cost and efficiency perspective, is CPA. Really straightforward to calculate, gives you a lot more information, a lot more data. And then the third one, if you're being a bit more advanced and you want to just get more into the real tangible efficiency of your business, that is your CAC, so your customer acquisition cost, your fully loaded cost with all expenses in there related to sales and marketing. What this means for your business is that once you have this data, you can then leverage it. As I said, you can then manipulate the data in a way that makes sense for you. But if you don't know this data, or you don't have the information available, it is so important that you get it. You need to level up your finances, because if you don't, you're going to be constantly chasing your own tail, not knowing where you stand. That's what we do, try and break it down in a way that makes sense for you so you can understand it and then actually take action on it so that you can make more profits and that you can actually enjoy the fruits of your labor and not end up, chasing your own tail, not earning any money. So, if that's been super helpful for you, leave a comment down below, thumbs up, and subscribe for more content.